Hello everyone, and thanks again for joining us. This is the first session of SYSTRAN's webinar series for the U.S. government community, and we plan to hold others later this year. The title of this webinar is Automated Translation Technology, 4 Commercial Best Practices Applicable to Government Language Programs. I'd like to introduce today's webinar presenters. Your keynote speaker is Philip Staiger. He is one of SYSTRAN's technical account managers who is responsible for technical consulting for both pre- and post-sales account relationships. Philip has been with SYSTRAN since 2012 and is a natural for this position. Not only does he have a very technical background, but he's also fluent in 3 languages and conversant in another 2 languages. So I'd like to thank Philip for sharing his knowledge with us. I'm your second speaker, and my name is Beth Flaherty. I'm SYSTRAN's Director of Government Solutions, and I'm happy to know several of you in the audience. Even though I've been with SYSTRAN for 6 months, I'm no stranger to the language services and technology field. I've been in this space for over 20 years, having worked for companies like Berlitz, Lionbridge, and SDL. I really think it's important to build awareness about the value of translation technology in the government space, and that's why I find the topic we're presenting of interest. Philip and I would like to welcome you to what we believe will be a very informative session. I know many of you are already familiar with SYSTRAN, but for those of you who aren't, SYSTRAN is a global market leader in the machine translation field. We began as a role-based machine translation company, but now also offer a hybrid model using statistical engines. Our current R&D efforts and upcoming products are focused on the neural networks, which is all the buzz in the field of artificial intelligence. We currently offer over 140 language pairs, which is a dynamic number given that we can create new language pairs as a service. Several of our language pairs are from and into English, but we're unique in that we offer several other combinations. Even though our core competency is in text translation, we're expanding our capabilities rapidly into the areas of speech and OCR. We've been around for the past 48 years, and some of you may know that our history began in the 1960s with the U.S. Air Force as one of our first customers. In fact, they remain a satisfied customer to this day. We have significant past performance in both the government and commercial space. In the government, our footprint spans the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and civilian agencies. In this presentation, our goal is to give you a better understanding of how SYSTRAN's offerings can help augment yours. This webinar is rich with information, and we're expecting you'll have follow-up questions. We'll have time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, and we'll answer the questions you've submitted in the chat box. We also invite you to reach out to us separately after this webinar to discuss issues pertinent to your organization. So before we get started with the commercial best practices, I'd like to ask Philip to set the stage by explaining why machine translation, or automated translation as it's known in the government, is so important.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen and my microphone. I would like to welcome everybody to this presentation. It will be a little bit technical, but there is, of course, a lot of technical detail to learn about when we talk about machine translation. So why should we add AT, automated translation, to what you already do? You have a workflow. What's in it for you? From us and from similar companies, you'll hear that there is potential for saving money, and it's big. The reality is that there is potential for saving money, and it is big, but most likely your boss will say, hey, let's use that to do more work, right? Be more productive at it. And the good news is that it will not cause you to lose your job, because there is really a lot of work to do, a lot of post-editing that needs to be done as well. So the machine translation is a step into getting there faster. I like to call it, AT, automated translation, MT, machine translation. It's kind of like a TM on steroids, because when you see how it's integrated, it behaves the same or in a very similar way to translation memories, and it makes it easier to integrate. It makes it easier to just keep using what you already have learned and not have to do something totally different. We can also call it smart TM. Intelligent, because if you have, for instance, a sentence like this: in this moment, Sir Isaac Newton realized why the apple fell to the ground. And in French, this might have come from a sentence like this one: en ce moment, Monsieur Isaac Newton réalisa pourquoi pomme tomba au sol. Another sentence with translation memory, you might say, I have something similar. So fuzzy TM can be used because there are some changes, but not a whole lot. And you can either ask the human post editor to fix it, or you can even have some amount of calculations done by the computer to figure, oh, maybe we have a better term for this, or we have a better way to phrase that particular piece. But that's relatively doable with translation memory. Where it gets to be a bit more challenging is if you have something drastically different. Right? At this point, there is still talk about the same person, but he's not even named by the same way. And in the action or the whole sentence is just really different. So what we need is something a little bit more intelligent than translation memories. Let's face it, it's a difficult thing even just to understand, let alone to translate. Understanding is something that we gradually do in one language and then possibly in a few others. But even in a language where we think we are proficient, there is one level to get the gist of the message, to understand what's being said. It doesn't have to be perfect. And in many cases, such as for e-discovery or to decide where to stash it away for a few years before it gets human reviewed or translated, that's enough. You do also have a whole category of work that needs to be published: flyers, marketing, legal documents, that sort of things. And human review is still suggested. It's also challenging because of the abbreviations, the acronyms. When my neighbor's dog passed away a few years ago, that was actually many years ago, just when my kids were starting to use chat programs, I thought LOL stood for lots of love, and so I gave her this card. So sorry for your loss, LOL. That's a faux pas, and you want to avoid having mistranslations due to acronyms, TLAs, POS, part of speech for us, typically in linguistics, but point of sales. It could be parent over shoulder, right? When your teenagers are alerting their colleagues that they cannot tell the truth. Home in a web page, you're translating something that's on a web page. It could be casa, it could be inicio, which is the start of the home page. Houston, we had a problem. DC has been wiped out. That's bad news, right? Potentially, especially if you're in politics or in anti-terrorism. And I don't know why I put the two together, but you do have usually the understanding that DC stands for District of Columbia. If you're a satellite engineer, electrical engineer working on deep space communication, it may be bad news, but not that bad. It's probably something that can be fixed. Direct current is what DC stands for. So it's a lot of challenge because we make the language itself difficult, and not just us on the English side. From any languages, there is abbreviations. And early on, we tried to remember what can we do without having to redo it. So the birth of the TM, translation memory, went way before computers, where we had cheat sheets or typed up material with the typewriters or even handwritten notes. Perhaps, the Ten Commandments maybe were the first that then later got translated, but something had to be written down in the first place. Now, whenever you translate something new, you might say, well, I think it's in French. I'm not absolutely sure, but let's see if we've actually translated that before. So you go through a list of records and you see, oh yeah, there it is. We don't have to redo the job. This has been translated before. Let's assume we can keep going the same way. Well, so with computers, we can do this really quickly, right? It's storing it, storage capacity, a disk, a hard drive, memory is cheap. We can do a lot of that. But there are times when we need more. And while computers are getting intelligent, we can certainly use them to do a little bit more than just repeat, find the information and show us what we did in the past. So what we want to do is see, well, how can they really help us? Adding machine translation or automated translation, how can that help you get through your work a little bit faster? And actually, it's going to be significantly faster in a number of cases. Here are 3 case studies that are from different clients that were, well, they started as prospects and eventually turned into clients to see what is the impact on productivity. You can have machine translation added to their existing workflow and do post-editing on that instead of doing full translation, or in some cases still some translation. We wanted to know, they wanted to know, ultimately, what do we get and how do we get there? Using technology, using programs, using software to help them in speeding up the translation process. And what is my potential return on investment? I would say at the minimum we should see 30%, but in many cases we've seen more. 70, I think there's one that I'm showing here that even for some particular project, so about 85% reduction in time to completion. The way it's done is to use the machine translation by adding terminology. You already do that. You have probably term bases. You have lists of do not translates, DNT. You want to use that and recycle it. And same with the translation memories, right? The sentences that you review and validate, it's worth gold. It's something you do want to not just use as such, but actually even more, train the machine translation with that. So the workflow might look something like this, where you have your system, maybe something you developed, or Trados, MemoQ, and so on. And at some point you decide, wait, do we have this sentence already? You're about to translate a new sentence, and the system is going to check whether we have an exact match or a near perfect, a fuzzy match. If it's close enough to the threshold, wherever you said that, it goes to the post-editing with the human review. But if it's too low in match, if it's just too different and you don't have any translation memories that are close enough, or it's a new project and you have zero translation memories for that, you would typically want to have it pre-translated with machine translation. And then it goes, in fact, to the same person. The post editor will receive it and may not even see the difference. Typically, you probably will want them to know that it came through MT, but in reality, they'll do the same work. It behaves the same, and at some point, they can recycle the translation memories to keep using those, but they can also now recycle some or more information to retraining the machine translation. Now that can happen the exact same way or even more, perhaps on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis, do what we call a customized training that will be very advanced based on understanding what you have done in the past. So there are many different levels of such customizations, and in the end, the goal is to bring it to a level where the human post-editing is minimal, and you have a lot more you can process. Some of it is very easy to do. It's a couple of clicks away, one button, option, a menu, a couple of dictionaries that may already exist, but we don't know whether you're translating for biotech or for rocket engines. So you have a variety of choices as to which dictionaries to enable. Most importantly, you want to add your own. And then there's a variety of other levels all the way to statistical machine translation, and the combination of that with rule-based called the hybrid engine with SPE, statistical post-editing. And all of these really are steps you can take either right away or gradually. You can consult with experts that show you how to do that, or you can have them do that for you. There's a variety of solutions to this. So here are three different examples. Example number one was for a fairly large set, at the time 1 to 2 million sentences or segments. They are now at about 3.5, I think, for that particular language. And this was presented by Cisco at AMTA, so this is public knowledge. This was a one-year review or project to evaluate the impact of using MT inside their existing workflow for human evaluation. And there were a lot of good surprises. There were occasionally some unexpected slowbacks. There was an incident here where the productivity went down a little bit because new terminology had been introduced or new translation memories that contained new terminologies, and the post editors had to get used to that. But overall, it was above this curve. The target was to see an improvement, and it was significant for specific projects in that timeline, 50% overall, and some of them even more, 85% reduction in cycle time for releasing a product. 59-day original estimate came down to 10 days. These are some of the extreme possibles. You'll see others in smaller cases. You may have just maybe 10,000 or 50,000 segments. This is an example from a language service provider. They had about 30,000 segments. A few more were organized by splitting existing long sentences. Sometimes you have a whole chapter in a segment, and you can organize it by separating the sentences. And then there's these metrics, the industry standard metrics such as Blue score or translator error rate, the TER score, the perfect score. There's a few others out there. And they could see how it improved by training the machine translation engine to be aware of the content with these 27,000 segments. So at some point, you keep doing this, and you get machine translation that gets closer and closer to human quality. There is still the human post-editor needed, but here is the result of their analysis. Instead of 88 hours, it would take 58 or 70 hours for this particular one language with the machine translation team 1 or team 2. The team 1 was more experienced. It was a senior post-editor, so it took them less time. Juniors will usually over-translate or over-edit. So it took them a little bit less, but there was still a gain over the original experience, having translated everything from scratch. In another language, it was even more significant. So this more than 50% less than, it took less than that to do it because of the use of machine translation. So this is an example with relatively little material. We have also other examples with nothing, no machine translation, no translation memories that can be used initially, but the machine translation immediately helps as well. Here's the last one of the 3 examples. This one was on a company that makes a lot of software that we use every day for a variety of uses, multimedia, illustration, and it's technical documentation. And over the years, they keep seeing increases in how good the translation is. It's now over the 70. This is about a year old. It's over the 70 mark for the blue score. And we know that at about 75-ish is where human translation is estimated. 80-ish, it's a fairly good, somebody with subject matter expertise. So there are challenges, but the fact is that even though there are perhaps 20 different ways to translate POS, point of sale, part of speech, piece of sushi, to be careful here. My initials happen to be POS. There are several medical ways to translate it, like pulmonary ovary syndrome. There's cities, there are products of sum in mathematics. I like to call it power of SYSTRAN, and it is really an interesting addition to using simply machine translation memories, because it takes it to the next level. It allows you to significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to do a big translation project. Now, with that, I'd like to run a first poll, and in that poll, I will launch it right now. You should see a couple of questions, one question with a couple of answers, and please take the time to read them and then check one of the options. Good. We're going to close this in a second or two. Make your last call. All right, let me close it now. And let me share that. So it looks like certainly it's important to have much of that technology, whatever technology it is, behind your firewall, right? You want, if you do translation, you don't want to go out to the cloud to have that happen. It is a necessity to have it secure and hidden from prying eyes. And then there are, of course, also a lot of things to learn that are new. So to some extent, you may not have used machine translation yet at all. You might have the use of translation memories, but beyond that, I want to show you now. Let me set up the next section. All right, so now we're talking about actually making this a reality by adding machine translation to your existing environment, to your existing workflow. In other words, to extend your current system, whether it's Trados or some translation memory management system, maybe it's software you developed for e-discovery, analytical tools of a variety of kinds. And so we want to see how to integrate it, exactly what are you going to see when you start using it, where are the benefits, what to expect, and really to boldly go where no human dialect has gone before, because you can now start to translate things that perhaps you didn't even have a linguist for initially. Right. So the questions that we all have is, not only how, but also, again, why do we want to do that? Because mostly it will save you time and make you more productive. Also, another reason is because it's actually easy to implement. It makes it easy to use once it's implemented. So adding it, there are a couple of pros and cons. Right. The pro certainly is that it will get you more productive, do some projects faster. It will save money, time, which is about the same. It will allow you to also extract terminology. I mean, there are some tools that come with it that allow you to find out of your existing translation memories, which of course use all that terminology you want them to use. You can actually extract that terminology. There are some automated tools for bilingual terminology extraction. And a couple of other things that are noteworthy is post-editing overall is cheaper than full translation. So you may be able to hire up, because you have a budget that's given, and you have perhaps additional workers that can be contributing to that project. MT systems can learn. That's another interesting thing, right? It's not about something that you buy, like say, off the shelf, and that's it. No, you actually have something that can learn, that can be customized and to continue. And hot off the press, I'm proud to mention that we just announced also the next level of machine translation, which is beyond statistical, beyond rule-based. It is called NMT, Neural Machine Translation, and that will be the next generation, starting actually as of yesterday. It's not available as a product yet, but you will see that if you start using machine translation with SYSTRAN, you will see a continuation of learning to get even better, both on the products and on your side as you are learning to teach the system. And that's really one of the obstacles. Quite often people think, is there a difficult learning curve? Use it inside of Trados or with some other tools? And the answer is no. It can be integrated in a very pleasant, very easy way. For developers, even more so. When they develop and they code, they have perhaps some experience with some of the technology that we use too. The cost can be significantly lower than hiring, staffing of human translators, and that's actually what gave the birth to the start of SYSTRAN. Goes back to the fact that the Air Force looked at all this material that they had in Russian, and they could not see getting the budgets or approving or hiring even the number of human translators that would have been needed. So that led to the interest, and the need really was there to make it go faster. All right, so what is it if you don't have machine translation? So, for instance, in Trados, you look at this tool and you have some translations that are matched exactly. This is the green one here. That's an exact translation memory match. You may have some that come close, and you may take them as is, or you may do some post-editing. But you also will have some that are just no suggestion. We don't have a fuzzy match close enough, or you don't want to lower the threshold too low, because then you're going to do a lot of post-editing anyway. And that's the problem with this here. You see a number of different sentences, but always the same suggestion, because we have just one only that comes close enough to be in the category. I think in this one I have like 80% as the threshold. And so the problem with that is really incomplete, and there's a lot of time spent in post-editing or in translating from scratch. Whereas if you use automated translation, every single sentence is already pre-translated, not only the ones for which you do have a TM entry or a fuzzy. In this way here, in this example, it was configured to only use either exact match or automated translation. In other words, we didn't use the fuzzy levels. You can do that too, and we'll see some examples. But the benefit with this really is that it's showing a lot more work done already. You can get the gist of this right now. And then, of course, if you need it to be published or presented in a more high quality way, you will want to review these as well, but that's done much faster than pre-translate or human translating everything that you see here. So this is the side-by-side of not using MT and yes, using MT with SYSTRAN, and it can go even better. So you have the ability to do exact matches and fuzzy matches, or for instance, exact matches and machine translation, but you can also do a couple of other things and realize, for instance, where do we go beyond the capabilities of fuzzy matches. If you have sentences where numbers showing, the numbers may be different in the actual sentence. Now, some translation memory systems will actually catch that and show a different number. In our case, we will show the right numbers even when they are ranges, and that's the thing, is that sometimes you have an annex, or you have a range of numbers rather than just one, and your translation memory has just one. It doesn't know what to do beyond that. So it needs to go to that level of intelligence, and that's what machine translation does. So here are some examples, right? you want to not just do machine translation and hope it's as good as it gets. You want to make it and help it to go better. So the next level is to make it an intelligent choice on terminology as well. You already have your term bases. You already have lists of do not translates and even part phrases. You can put them to good work, and we'll see some examples. So again, side by side, if you have nothing of that sort, if you didn't even use translation memories, if you didn't use any fuzzy matching, you are basically a full translator. Everything here has to be done by the human translator. The next level is to enable translation memories, but exact matches only. Well, depending on how early you're catching this, you are going to see only a few exact matches. And some of these exact matches may be outdated, or they may have a typo that slipped past the detection of the human review. It's absolutely possible. This is a true example. It's not one that I created. It's actually one that, in endommagé in French has two M's. Well, in English it doesn't. So the next level is to use fuzzy matches, and at that level you'll start seeing more of the work already done. But a lot of time, still quite a bit of time, needs to be spent in post-editing that, because there are just not enough fuzzy matches to cover it nicely. And the amount of work that it represents is still costly. So the other scenarios that you'll also see is that, of course, there still are a lot of sentences that have to be translated from scratch altogether. Now, if you add automated translation or machine translation with SYSTRAN, in this case without fuzzy matching, you will have every sentence here pre-translated, and you can certainly get the gist of it. In many cases, it may be ready for immediate validation. But you can also do a combination with fuzzy matches. And so at this time, you have perhaps what might be the ideal scenario, where you have fuzzy matches and you set the bar pretty high, not 80 or 75%, more like 95, 96, 97%. It depends, of course, on how good the machine translation is and whether you want to use that whenever it falls below 95%. Maybe you lower it to 80 or 85, 90, something like that. So the experience will show you where is the right level. Question is also, how do you integrate that? Where is it available? And we are already in quite a number of environments where we have plugins or connectors directly available. One of them that's coming soon is for Across. And of course, there are numerous others that we don't know about, because our customers buy the system, buy the software, and develop their own. Right? It has the API, and that's the do-it-yourself option you see at the bottom here. With the REST protocol, the SOAP protocol, you can integrate it into your own tools. All right, so how is that really done? As an example, let's see a quick walk through with inside of Trados. If if you're familiar with Trados, you'll have at some point a choice to make on which translation memories you want to add to the project. And as you do that, you'll have some in files. You may have a server-based translation memory, and you can add SYSTRAN if you added the SYSTRAN connector. Right, so then that will show an extra option here to enable machine translation or automated translation. And once you're done, you'll see basically a choice of multiple translation memories. It behaves like a translation memory at that level. Right, and the configuration of an actual project would also have you set the thresholds, the minimum match value for translation memories. One thing you want to add now is to look up the segments in MT. Machine translation, you want to enable it since you have the ability to access it at this point. And then, of course, also if you do the actual configuration, you say, okay, now let's see, where is my server? Which protocol am I using? And you need to provide an API key. And at some point also perhaps choose a very specialized profile. Now, if you don't, you simply choose the default or generic profile. But if you want to make it go better, if you went through customizing it, if you went through creating a trained engine, you'll have a profile that indicates this one's available, this one's French to English for automotive repair guides, and we might want to use this one. So at that point, you go back to what you do all the time anyway. You pre-translate, you run it through perhaps a new pre-translation because you've added another translation memory on the Trados side as well, and you do that, but this time you remember to also enable this apply automated translation, right? And so that's the key to allowing machine translation to be added and to enrich your experience inside the project. So now at that point, once you have this configured, as you review the results, you'll have a combination of exact matches like you've had so far. You'll have some fuzzy matches that were high enough to not fall below the threshold. And then you'll have a whole lot of sentences that are no longer blank, but instead are showing a very good pre-translation, courtesy of SYSTRAN machine translation. The next step that I'd like to do is number 3, and for that I will simply switch to my next presentation. And with this one, we're talking about, well, how can we make that better, right? It's one thing to use a generic machine translation. It's another to make it a good one, a customized one. So the goal is to improve it by a variety of techniques. Some of them, you do them day one, and it takes just a minute or a second to enable something. Some of them are a little bit more sophisticated. But overall, the goal is to see if we can, this blue area here where the machine translation is happening, how can we improve that? And as you validate the sentences of these improved sentences and get to the, complete the job faster, you can then also take the results, of course, back into the regular translation memories, which will help with future exact matches and fuzzy matches as well. So it's beneficial to focus on a variety of things. This one is a quick look at terminology. You probably do that already. You have term bases, terminology databases, and if you don't use them, a generic MT might look like bridges of valve for a pont de soupape, or some other automotive repair guides like valves of escape. And that, of course, is better translated as an exhaust valve, or the plural form of it. And so the beauty of machine translation is that, first of all, it knows when to inflect it or how to inflect it, so when it goes into plural form, but also to accept additional terminology. So you have your user dictionaries that can make it better and more appropriate for particular needs. So let's take a look at what can you do, right? How do you get to do better machine translation, not just good machine translation? And there is technology, and to understand where you can make it better, it's a good idea to understand how it works, at least in a very superficial way. Right? You have a black box, you have some sentence coming in, something's happening inside, it's coming out. It's not magic, it's computer software. At one level, very early on in this process, we may want to say, hold on, have we actually, are we looking at something that is littered with typos and slang? Maybe it came from OCR with poor quality, or a noisy ASR with a lot of background noise. It can spoil it. So the material may have some flaws. It may be typos. Somebody doesn't know how to type or have a lazy key on the keyboard every time they write something. So you can normalize that. We call that a source normalization, or source ND. That's the first level at which you can make it look better before it even undergoes transformation in the translation process. Now, at the next step, you want to say, wait, hold on, have we seen this sentence before? And so here's where your translation memories could come in, even if you already had it filtered through Trados, because we may also want to look for a fuzzy our way and then fix just the parts that are fuzzy, the parts that are not an exact match. And we may want to produce some information, some statistics for you on how close this was or how good idea it was to translate it. Based on the existence of translation memories, we could say this is something we feel comfortable with. Or no, maybe this is something you might want to have a full review by the human translator. So there are thresholds involved and statistics that it can help to have the translation memories. It's not a must-have, but it certainly is something you will occasionally want as well. At some point, of course, it goes ready, set, go, right? We need to translate what is not done yet. And those sentences or those words or part phrases, as they go through translation, they can get one more push, one more level of help, and that's your user dictionaries. Right, so you can have your terminology, your term base, your vocabulary, specialized terminology added to the system. And suddenly this box doesn't look all that black, right? There is one more step. In fact, you can rephrase it, maybe just for formatting purposes. That's the normalization again, ND at the source, ND at the target site. For instance, to spell something out or to abbreviate it so that it fits a narrow column in an Excel sheet or something like that. So there's a variety of additional things you could do that's actually after the translation, but still part of the entire idea of getting the message across and properly formatted. In fact, one of them is to overlay this or combine this with a hybrid statistical post-editing, and that's one of the more advanced levels that can take maybe a few days to develop, but it's automated for the most part, and it can generate very high-quality machine translation, not only with the proper terminology from the user dictionary, but also with a better fluidity in terms of choosing parts of phrases, catchphrases or certain sequences of words rather than others. So as you send something in, even if it's slightly flawed, this one supposed to be Russian, which means I don't speak Russian very well, and I also don't spell it really well because I have some typos here, right? But nonetheless, we can have it translated because of the corrections we do at the top, at the beginning, because we have an engine that understands how to translate. And overall, what you'll really want to understand is that, okay, you do select the source and the target, but you get to also choose a profile. If you don't, you just get the default, and that's not a bad start, right? This can be a really good start already. But the message here is to say, well, we can do better. And so you may have a Canadian-French dictionary or a profile containing such dictionaries. You may have a variety of other scenarios where, let's say, a technical profile is called for rather than a legal and business-minded one. So all of these things, whether it's dictionaries or translation memories, we call that a profile. All of these things are grouped into a profile. And as you put it in a profile, you may later add to it. You can customize it over time. So it doesn't take a lot of time to set it up, right? You go here, you set add a profile, and then you say what you want to add in here, and you'll see, okay, there's an engine. Let's choose a base engine. Let's choose perhaps some default dictionaries. The system comes with a couple of dictionaries you can choose from. If you say, well, I will be mostly with this profile, translate material that is very colloquial, has a lot of LOLs and OMGs, has a lot of abbreviations and perhaps some symbolism. But on top of that, of course, add your own dictionaries, add your own translation memories, add your own normalization dictionaries, and there are other type of resources, style sheets, entity recognition rules with regular expressions, a lot of things that can go very advanced, but also very easy things to customize. So some of it is linguistics. You just choose an option that says, oh, I'm translating to Brazilian Portuguese, please, or I'm translating to the traditional Chinese, not the simplified. So you have a variety of choices that's just a click away. There's also dictionaries. We saw there are some presets, but then, of course, your own, especially what not to translate. It's funny. It's not only about what to translate, but also what not to translate. You don't want Mr. Friendly to turn into Senor Amistoso or Monsieur Amicalement. There is a lot of things like product names and cities, geographic information, company names that should not be translated, and at times it's difficult because they are very similar to something that has a different meaning. They look like adverbs, they look like some noun, and you're tempted to translate them. So you have to have the understanding of that, and if the system by default doesn't, you can certainly customize it to do so and have that. Normalization, same thing. Is something too long? Is something too short? So here are some examples just to kind of bring it home, because a picture tells 1,000 words, and when you see this, you say, oh yeah, there are two forms of imperative in many languages. When you translate to Somali or to Swahili or to some of these, is there a better way given the audience? Should I do an imperative that's infinitive? Should I do a polite form? Should I do something that, for instance, the first person gender, if you translate a company speech by a company president who is a woman, we should make that feminine rather than masculine by default. Right, so that way you have the inflections that are adapted accordingly, and you get better translations. Now there's also normalizations I mentioned. With normalizations, you can change things before they get translated or after. For instance, is there a typo? Right? Quite often in a job application, you see, I would like to talk to the manager. No, you can talk to the manager all day long. Little Jesus was born once. He's not coming back that same day you talk to it. You want to talk to the manager. But this is something that actually escapes the spell check because manager is a noun and it could be the action of or the object of talking to it. There may be other scenarios, all capitalized, and maybe C is not a programming language. Maybe it's simply an abbreviation of SEE. So you can rephrase it before it actually goes through translation, right? Expanding it too. If you have an abbreviation, but sometimes it means one thing and sometimes it means something else. What you want to do is indicate, well, what does it mean in this case? Put it in a profile so you have one profile where you translate it one way and you have a different one where you translate it a different way. But before it translates, you need to say what it means. And that's what you can do with the normalization. You can expand it to its actual meaning. US, is that us, like you and me, or is that United States? Shorten it at the end, after translation, or even before. You may want to freeze it into a shorter form, right? For instance, desde 10 hasta 40 minutos, if it doesn't fit in your web page or if it doesn't fit in your tables or in your Excel spreadsheets, make it shorter. And you can actually use techniques like these to make the translation really more adapted. It's not a better one in terms of linguistic. It's simply one that you like better because of a number of criteria, including the formatting. OCR glitch is very common when you scan an image and like a PDF that really contains a JPEG image with poor, high compression, poor quality, a lot of fuzzy letters and pixels around the numbers and letters. Instead of perdones, it might look like a number 6 here. And that really varies by the font, but some fonts will make it look, especially if you have poor vision like myself, it could look like paired and then a number 6 and then NES. And that's not a word we know how to translate, but you can tell the system if we see this, turn it into this, and then go translate that. Same with avion for an airplane. Others, there's a lot of different scenarios here. If you have Chloe, it's not necessarily the presence of hydrochloric acid, so no need to worry about that. This can be used for a variety of systems, a variety of techniques and needs. To summarize, there are a number of techniques and tools that come with this in this system. You have reviewing sentences, and you have a term like a pin that's perhaps a sensor diode pin, so a piece of electronics. And there are different ways for electronics or electricity versus medicine versus maybe a hairpin or a personal identification number, different ways to translate it. At the target level too, right? It's not just I mean, specifically at the target means like how do you translate it, but then also at the source. Is it a pin, the verb to pin down, or is it a pin? So there are cases where the words in foreign languages too are spelled the same way, but may have different meanings. And then, of course, they can have very different meanings if they are being used in a symbolic way, in a colloquial way, or in a secretive way. So what you want is the tools, the ability to actually see and recognize whether your terminology that you are now customizing is indeed taking effect. Right? Some things like color coding will tell you, oh yeah, it looks like my terms are now starting to populate into these translations. A number of things you want to do include, therefore, using your terminologies. This is actually a look at some of the things you can do if you already have your multi-term. What is the impact if you look at the blue scores and you evaluate the quality of translation through some of these metrics, blue scores, TER, word error rate. And so some of these are automatically done. We have tools like the automatic single word and multi-word extraction, the terminology extraction, and some of them have a significant impact. Some of it you'll say, well, we'll do that later, perhaps in a phase 2 or phase 3, right? So perhaps one of the best approaches to translate, or to rather to improve the translation quality, is to use what we call the training server. Because with the training server, you can go several times, perhaps in an iterative approach, choose a few different parameters, or increase the material over time. Every time you have reviewed some material, you have new translation memories, put them to good use in the training, and you end up getting better and better translation. And at some point, it will have reached human translation for your projects. So here's an example with traditional Chinese to English on financial reports. Initial quality on the blue was fairly low, at a blue score of 7, eventually went over 40, 41. And it is quite commonly seen that, or understood that at 40, it's not possible to misunderstand. You do not get, you will get the message. You will get the gist of the message. What is still possible is perhaps that the choice of words is a little bit funny or a little bit odd, but it is usually a really solid gisting level when you're over 40 for the blue score. So some of the tools allow you to even create translation engines for languages we don't even have yet. Right? Here's an example for Tamil. So ENTA, English to Tamil, we can actually train the engine to learn how to do that with statistical machine translation. All we need is your existing machine or human translations rather. You have already collections of such material. If you have sentences that are from Tamil to English or English to Chinese, well, Chinese we already do, but if you have a language we haven't done yet, you can make it so by using the training server and build a statistical machine translation engine. Here is an example about 2 years ago with English to Portuguese. On about 200,000 sentences, we started with a blue score of 24, went over to 66. That's the one that currently is at about 75. So definitely in the area of human translation. And it is definitely possible to get there. It takes time. But time is money. You either spend the time and then you keep benefiting from that, or you spend the money again and again to try to do the same thing. So one of the tools you also want is not just trust those blue scores. I mean, it's a good measure, it's a good metric to use, the blue scores, the perfect score, the CHR. These are good, but they are not perfect all the time. And one thing you also want is review the sentences. So you'll see here a comparison between the human reference. You see the source being translated. Here's the human reference, and then you see the untrained or original default translation that we produce, and then a trained hybrid model, how it does better. And you'll see, for instance, there's a word perhaps that needs to be capitalized, or perhaps it needs to have ilve instead of o. Both of them are understood. Both of them are relatively good, but it learns to mimic what was seen in other sentences in prior translations. So we want to get the blue scores up, we want the CHR rates to go low, and in the end, there's another place where you can also work, and that's particularly if you write the material. Right? If you write the material, there's a number of things you want to do to make it easy for others to read, even if they are English readers, but maybe not first, let's say it's not their mother tongue, but they still read English. It will be easier for them to read. That means it's easier for machine translation as well. So there's a number of things we can help you with to understand, what machine translation can do really well. And quite often, it's something that human translation does in a similar way much better. So to summarize, there are many different ways you can customize. Some of it we didn't go into detail, some of it we did. Hopefully, your take home is that you can do some of it right away. Some of it is already there. Some of it you just need to enable, and then gradually you say, oh wait, don't we have a translation memory on this project? Let's put it in there too. Or do we have a term base? Or here's another 20 words we could also use. And then there's also the feedback server. The system comes with a mechanism for a feedback, so that as anybody who's using the system to do translations will be able to send feedback to the reviewer or the manager of the machine translation system. And that feedback server allows you to then communicate and see over time the improvements being implemented. Now, it doesn't stop there, right? The question is, what's next? Well, from rule-based machine translation to statistical. The statistical is something that happened about 15 years ago. We are there now even in a hybrid way with statistical post-editing. But even beyond that, as of yesterday, announcing that we have the technology to implement the neural networks technology to what's the new term, NMT, neural machine translation. And so that's really the avant-garde, or the next level of making it even better, right? You don't translate sentence by sentence anymore. You translate the full chapter at the same time. You look at everything to get a better idea of what's the topic, what is it talking about. That's only a piece of it. There's a lot more to it. But it is typically how we read when we translate, or when we just read. We go forward, we go back, we look around. Oh wait, it's probably talking about this. There's some graphic. Let's analyze and start translating based on what we have analyzed. So it's getting better. It's getting faster. And I certainly think it's a great time to join and to start using it, because it's very educational. It's very good for the pocketbook. You can certainly save a lot of time and get the job done. Whether you're a developer and you want to use SYSTRAN.io, or a webmaster and you have a knowledge base that you're sharing online, you want that to be translated in 30 seconds, it's done. Machine translation, it takes just the time for you to sign up and enable and validate your website. okay, maybe 2 minutes, but essentially some of this is very fast. And with that, I'd like to give it back to Beth.
Thanks, Philip. Best practice number 3 focuses on empowering your staff. I recently attended the DOTIS conference, which is sponsored by the Defense Intelligence Agency's CIO office. There were several good sound bites, but one of them that resonates with this section is, your challenge is to think disruptively. And another one I liked was, get people to do things differently. These were mentioned by the CIO, Miss Glover Jones. In this day and age, thinking disruptively and differently typically involve the use of technology. Since many of you are in management positions, your job is to be the catalyst for this. And as you know, with any new technology you try to implement, your staff needs to embrace the technology in order for it to be effective. For this reason, I'd like to offer you a few ideas for how you can be a catalyst for empowering your staff. Offer formal and on-the-job training. This training can be on the tools themselves, or on how to post-edit automated translation, or on your new workflow. There are several courses available and would be happy to recommend them to you if interested. Make technology skills a criteria for job advancement. This is applicable to both your linguist and your project managers. I know that for some of the commercial language service providers, if staff isn't able to check the boxes on certain skills in technology or for using digital language resources, they're not eligible for promotions. Encourage technology for repetitive tasks. As Philip showed you, SYSTRAN's automated translation can very easily leverage translation memories and glossaries. So instead of translating the same sentence over and over or looking up that word through a different website, which disrupts their workflow, your staff can leverage the technology. This would free up their time to do the tasks that depend on human knowledge. Use technology as a teaching tool for your novices. SYSTRAN's automated translation is built on a rules-based model and therefore displays parts of speech, dictionaries, etc. Also, machine translation can be trained to upward of a 2+ of the Interagency Language Roundtable, or ILR, level for certain languages and genre. Therefore, it's a good rough first draft for your linguist. So as you can see from this best practice, it's really important that you empower your staff. As you know, in the government space, your people are ultimately your competitive advantage, regardless of whether you're a contractor or a government agency. To pick up another soundbite from the DOTIS conference, given by the Director of DIA, Lieutenant General Stewart, we need to continue building a cognitive advantage over our adversaries. Just a little bit later, he stated that it's important that we are leveraging everything that technology brings to the fight. So here you see that his comments encourage us to use the best of people and technology for the benefit of government missions. I think we have time for a second poll. The question is, what would most impact usage of automated translation in your environment? Better domain customization, better ease of use in our workflow, better training of our staff, or we don't have the need to use automated translation? Wasn't really sure what to expect from this poll, but the results are interesting. It seems like most of you chose better domain customization. The final best practice we'd like to share with you is expand your offerings. Whether you're an internal government translation provider or a contractor language service provider, you may want to consider expanding the language services you provide. For this slide, I pulled this infographic from a large commercial LSP's website. They offer a range of language services, and I can guarantee you that they use technology on the back end as a cost saver. You can do the same even if you're a small provider. I'll give 2 examples that, ironically enough, showcase technologies that SYSTRAN offers. As a first example, some of you may already offer website translations. However, you may not have the tools to provide a turnkey solution. This service is important in the government given Executive Order number 13166, which addresses improving access to services for persons with limited English proficiency, or LEPs. To make website translation easier, SYSTRAN has an offering called SYSTRAN Links. This technology provides the project management and automated translation capabilities for translating a website through use of our proxy server. I'll show you a few screenshots of the platform to introduce you to its capabilities. On the left side of the software, you see the different options like your settings, content management, and resources like dictionaries and translation memories. This first screenshot gives you access to drill into the different web pages. This next screenshot shows the translated segments. A translator can post-edit from this screen. And this last screenshot shows where you can manage your translation memories. So I was pleasantly surprised to learn of this software when I joined SYSTRAN, since I think it's a very comprehensive and helpful tool. Another way to expand your offerings, especially if you have a tech-savvy staff, is to integrate language technology modules into your existing platform. We offer a collection of application programming interfaces, or APIs, called SYSTRAN IO. This platform includes modules for text extraction, translation, and natural language processing. You'll notice on this slide a lot of different capabilities like name entity recognition, or NER, language identification, and speech to text. Here we have an example of natural language processing where you see entity extraction. The platform is offered at no cost up to a certain usage level, which is a way to encourage developers to use it as a sandbox. As you think of how else you can best service your client base, tools like SYSTRAN IO help you to think outside of the box. We had good intentions of having time for Q&A, but it looks like we're at the top of the hour. Instead, I'd like to end with this wrap-up slide on best practices. So to review, 1, extend your existing technologies. 2, tailor domains using your current assets. 3, empower your staff. And 4, expand your offerings. Philip and I would like to thank you for attending this webinar, and we welcome the opportunity to speak with you further. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to coordinate small meetings. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the week. This concludes our webinar.